And in 3, 2, 1.
You are now listening to the Lapsed Graps podcast.
Hello and welcome to the first ever episode 11 of Lapsed Graps, a podcast where I, Sam, a person who watches pro wrestling, sit down with my friend,
Jam, who doesn't?
and we discuss the wacky week that was in professional wrestling. There's a little bit of news, not as much news as last week, that we need to go over before we get into the wrestling of it all. So real quick, we just want to go over that AEW has announced that they have a games division now, an official games division that several of the wrestlers are currently signed to in addition to their wrestling duties. So you've got mainly Kenny Omega and the head referee Aubrey Edwards are running their games division. Omega obviously is a huge video game nerd, and Aubrey Edwards, before she was able to pay her bills full time as a wrestling referee while living in Seattle, was working for a mobile games company as a developer. So they announced their games division and announced 3 games that are going to be coming within the next year. The first is GM Simulator for mobile. So think Raw versus SmackDown 2005, the GM mode. It's that, but it's with AEW Dynamite. So the Dynamite roster, and I believe some, if not all, of the NWA roster as well, because there was like Serena Deeb and Thunder Rosa and Allison Kay shown on that game, on the like little bit of gameplay we saw, and you're setting the matches and trying to make the best program you can. Very similar to like 1980s Retromania wrestling, which is big on mobile devices right now, as well as 2000s Mania wrestling, but with actual licensed characters from AEW. So we might not be getting a GM mode in the mainline like console version of the game, which would be disappointing, but at least we've got this for the people that are really hankering to like play with AEW and make their women's division something to be proud of, or I don't know, whatever you would want to do there. But speaking of a mainline console game, they also announced that an AEW video game was currently in the early stages of development by a former WWE games developer, Ukes, who developed every WWE WWF game from 2000 until 2019. So they've been a lead developer on all the 2K games, all the like Raw versus SmackDowns, No Mercy, all of those games that we all look back on with such reverence, and then some of the games that we have some issues with. They were directly responsible for all of it. They were let go earlier this year so that WWE could go in a different direction with the future 2K titles as well as WWE Battlegrounds. So they seem to have signed, for now, a deal with AEW to develop their game. And Kenny Omega has commented that it is very much in the WWE No Mercy style. So the characters are a little bit cartoony. They've got exaggerated features, and that he wants it to be easy to pick up but difficult to master. So it sounds exactly like what a lot of Western wrestling fans have been aching for all these years, a return to the stadium style, or not stadium style, but arcade style wrestling game where you pick it up, you've got like moves that you can do easily by just pressing buttons, and then if you start getting good, you can start chaining together combos and working in that way. So I'm pretty excited for that. They also announced a AEW Casino mobile game, which is releasing before Christmas. There wasn't a lot of information about what this mobile game was. This was announced by Cody Rhodes, and the trailer that was shown was just all the different AEW wrestlers in a literal casino playing casino games. So it could be as easy, like as boiled down and as simple as you're able to play like blackjack and different casino games on your phone against like avatars that look like the wrestlers, which seems like a weird money grab to me, if that's what it is. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of wrestling component in there, and this was just like an early teaser trailer. But that is all the AEW games announcements. Are you a big video game guy? Do you have any like fond memories of the early WWE games done by Ukes? Do you have any thoughts on the mobile games? What are you thinking?
I definitely have fond memories of the old Ukes games because that was like in a lot of ways that kind of helped my gateway into wrestling because I got into wrestling when I was like 10 or 11 back in 2007. And when my brother knows I was into wrestling, he just so happened to have a coworker who was trying to get rid of all of his old wrestling video games. So one day my brother came home and gave me all these games, and I know they were from pretty sure they were all developed by you, because it was all the PS2 games like
Hmm.
SmackDown Just Bring It, SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, Shut Your Mouth, and like me playing with the rosters. It got me familiar with classic wrestlers, classic storylines, playing the story mode, and it made me excited to learn more and get into wrestling, and the games were just super fun. So if AEW can recreate that, I think it could really pull in some old fans, and if you're like me, bring in some new fans. I also think it's super cool that AEW's already getting into the video game market, only like just under 2 years into being a thing. And I guess with the president or owner having to own their own football team, it's definitely in the budget. But like knowing like WWE similar quote unquote competition and TNA not getting their first video game till like '08 or yeah, I think it was '08 when they were like 6, 7 years deep already. Like AEW's really getting the gears going really fast to the point they're not just getting one video game, but they're working on three video games, one of which is coming in December. So I think that's just super cool. They're just all systems go on this, I guess, gaming market. So it's exciting. I think it's cool.
Absolutely. It's definitely a another level of legitimization that they are on that same level of WWE, even if they are only, at this point, a year and so many months old, that they have the ability and the backing behind them to stick around and to put up that kind of effort. Because I don't even think WCW or ECW ever had video games until they were under the WWE license. I know they each had like their own line of figures, like uh ECW had like the San Francisco Toy Company figures, and then WCW had a line of figures as well through, I believe, like Jack's Pacific maybe. But like the video game market is one that neither of them really got into until they had already been bought by WWE. So this just kind of further cements that AEW is here to stay, at least for now. All right, but continuing on with the news, the Rascals have been announced as leaving Impact Wrestling next week. They were offered new contracts and they chose not to sign them. There is a pretty big rumor going around right now that all three of them have opted to sign with the WWE. So we don't have any confirmation or denial on whether or not the rumor they're going to WWE is true yet. They are still currently signed to Impact Wrestling, and the taping that airs on Tuesday was their last appearance. So we won't really know where they're going until they show up. If I was WWE or AEW, personally wouldn't be keeping these guys secret for very long. They air that they're leaving on Tuesday. You find a place to put them on your main programming on Wednesday. Would be my plan with this, just to immediately say, this is where they're at, this is where they're going to be. You got to come here to see the Rascals work. These guys are incredible, all three of them, and are going to do amazing things no matter where they go. Obviously, I would prefer them to end up in AEW because AEW is going to be a little bit more hands off with their gimmick, and all the AEW guys have worked with the Rascals before because of their links to PWG. So there's going to be a lot less um, chemistry issues in ring early on than you might have with WWE, where a lot of the guys that they did work with at one point or another have been in the WWE system now for several years. So it's going to be interesting to see where they rock up.
I agree there. Like those are three super talented guys, and WWE would be an odd place for me to see them just because I feel like they'd be toned down both in character and in the ring. But if they can make it work over there, then cool. If not, AEW definitely feels like a place that could fit their fast-paced style. By the way, if them leaving Impact means they're going on to bigger and better things, and I'm happy for them. They all just play their roles really well, and again, they're phenomenal in the ring. Wherever they go, I think they're gonna find some success.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where no matter where they end up, they're gonna be fine. You get so attached to these guys and the fact that they have their treehouse where they get high and just go on wacky adventures that you kind of hope they'll end up in like an AEW so they can play off like Private Party where they've got their treehouse, Private Party has their bar, and you're just kind of watching these two teams that get socially lubricated in different ways. Maybe that's their first big feud, is weed's better, no, alcohol's better, and just dumb crap like that. That's not going to happen in the WWE. But again, wherever they go, they're going to do amazingly. The last piece of news we want to talk about was a weird one that got announced like just a couple hours ago. Leo Rush announced via his Twitter account that he's going to be joining the cast of MTV's The Challenge for season 36. So The Challenge in its 36th season, which is insane, is going to be doing a series of veterans versus like professional athletes who were rookies to the show. So you've got like people that have done 18, 19 seasons of the challenge all the way down to like 2 or 3 seasons of the challenge on one side. And then uh, there's a couple of Olympic gold medalists that are going to be on it. Leo Rush is going to be on it. A couple of American Ninja Warrior people are going to be on it. And then one person from America's Got Talent, who I think is an acrobat, will be on it as well. So I've never watched the challenge. I will probably give it a shot because I really like Leo Rush this year, which is what they were probably hoping for, was people like me who've never seen it, but in season 36 are going to get started because Leo Rush is Leo Rush. Do you have any experience with the challenge? Any thoughts on Leo extending into like popular culture with like this show? Anything like that?
I don't know much about the challenge. Like, definitely not that was on for 36 seasons, which is wild to me. Like, the challenge was always something that existed exclusively in commercials to me. Like, I don't know anybody who's watched the challenge. I've never heard of it outside of, I didn't even know really existed beyond these commercials. But hey, from what I gather, it's like if the real world was a competition show, so it's apparently a big deal. And since it is a big deal, I think it's super dope that Leo Rush is not only being on the show, but really keeping himself busy this year since leaving WWE. Like, of course, he's got the music and indie bookings, but I also saw something about him being in a movie. Now he's got this show. And I think he was doing scans for some type of like indie video game coming out next year. So he's really being busy, and I just think it's dope just how much he's been busy so fast because he's only been gone from WWE. I want to say like 6 or 7 months, and he has not dropped the pace to begin with. So if he can keep it going, then it's already big things. Oh yeah, and New Japan for him. So super big things coming for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that movie, there hasn't been a ton announced about that, but it does look like it's going to be a Power Rangers fan film, kind of done in the style of the Rami Ismail like trailer that got dropped a couple of years ago on YouTube, kind of out of nowhere, where it's like Power Rangers, but with like a more gritty, realistic look at it. So like they're actually at war, and it's not all like happiness and sunshine and good to go and everything like that. And I haven't seen much in the way of like cast announcements, but from his tweet it looks like he might be playing the White Ranger in that fan film.
See, I didn't know it was a Power Rangers film. I just heard that he was in the movie. Like the little 5-year-old in me that was obsessed with Power Rangers just kind of like jumped for glee right now. Like that makes it even more dope. I'm excited. I gotta look into that. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to be playing the White Tiger Ranger. The Animal Rangers were a little bit outside my time. I was a main Power Rangers guy, and then I was like Dino Force and that was pretty much where I dropped out of Power Rangers. So I don't really know much about his character that he'll be portraying, but hopefully the film is able to go off without a hitch, and they don't have any cease or desist or anything like that, and we're able to see the fruits of that labor sometime soon. But just real fast, we're going to jump into the results from Full Gear this weekend, which is, at least in my mind, and it looks like a lot of people's minds across the internet right now, the best pay-per-view that came out this year, bar none. Like WWE, AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor, when they were still doing pay-per-views, all of it, like, this is the best one. This was a really, really solid card from start to finish. We're going to open it up with Kenny Omega defeating Hangman Page to become the #1 contender for the AEW World Heavyweight title. So that was a really solid match. You could tell that these guys have been working together for over a year as a tag team, and then had been like close friends before that, because it seemed before Hangman would even start a move, Kenny would be countering it in the same the other way around, and it just came down to Kenny getting a lucky one-winged angel and securing that pin. Any thoughts?
I'm kind of surprised that Kenny won. Like, I feel like that's a match that could have gone either way, but my money would have been on Hangman just because, like, from what I understand, they're doing like a character development thing with Kenny Omega where he's slowly descending back into like the kind of cleaner character that he was in New Japan. And I feel like, well, I was thinking that a loss to Page would have been like that one thing to like really kickstart that transition a little more. Though, like, him chasing the World Heavyweight Championship, whoever the world champion is that could still push him over the edge. So I'm very curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. This seemed like the kind of match that you wanted Hangman to win so that he could stay prevalent and stay on top of this feud, but they also seem to be building really interesting stories between Hangman and Omega. And, Omega, as much as he likes to say he doesn't have an ego, is very much hurt by the fact, or at least in kayfabe, is very much hurt by the fact that he wasn't considered the best wrestler of the year this year, and that Moxley was, and has made comments that he's going to get back to his roots as the best professional wrestler in the world, and is kind of just gunning after that title. We also saw Darby
Hey,
Allin.
can I just ask one question?
Yeah, what's up?
When you say Moxley was considered best wrestler in the world, does this go back to the PWI stuff or the
It does, yes, sir.
AEW? Okay.
Yeah, PWI.
Okay. Just curious.
So, and speaking of the PWI, there was a media call this week where Cody Rhodes revealed, and this is considered to be in kayfabe, so it's probably just a bit of character work, that he had planned like a $20,000 or $30,000 like allotment for a pyrotechnic display and balloons and things when the PWI 500 was announced, and he was announced as the #1 best wrestler in the world. That was then scrapped because Moxley was announced as the #1 best wrestler in the world, and he was pretty disappointed. A lot of people on Twitter were taking that seriously. That just seemed like character work to me, but he could really have thought he was owed that. But we just won't know that for sure.
That sounds like such a silly thing that it could. I take it as either character work or him just trolling on Twitter. Like, I don't know why people would take that seriously.
Yeah, I think the only reason it got taken as seriously as it did was because it was part of the AEW media calls for the week, that got like brought up, and he kind of came out of nowhere with it, where like it seemed like it had been weighing on him for a minute, and he just needed to bring it up. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you that it didn't seem to be anything other than a little bit of character work. But speaking of Cody Rhodes, Darby Allin wins the TNT Championship after pinning Cody Rhodes. This was a really, really solid match. Darby came in like full babyface on it, and Cody was playing with him the entire time. It seemed very evident that like Cody could have pinned him at any time, but was having a lot of fun playing with his food almost. And Darby was just able to capitalize on that and pin him and take the title. It was a really solid match. It wasn't my favorite Cody or even Darby match of the year, but considering the build-up we've gotten and the fact that the TNT division has basically become the Cody Rhodes division, I'm glad that we've got the title on someone else.
I think that's dope. Like it's like I remember we were talking last week, and I was kind of like flip-flopping because it was hard for me to decide who I thought should win. But I do remember thinking that like another loss to Darby Allin to Cody Rhodes would be a bad thing, just because like he will have lost two or three straight times, however many matches they've had. So him getting the gold, I think would be, or I think is the best decision they could have made, I guess.
No, definitely agree. It's one of those things where if you had kept the belt on Cody, you ran the risk of the division starting to feel stale. And by putting that belt on him, you're allowing the younger guys that this company has claimed over and over again that they are here to elevate to kind of take the ball and run with it. And allow Cody to kind of melt back into the background just a little bit and take over his backstage producing role again, which I think is where Cody does his best work, is back there, like keeping the ship moving as smoothly as possible.
Where do you think Derby goes with the championship now, and more importantly, where does Cody Rhodes go without the championship?
I think Cody continues to be a factor in the division, but I don't think he earns another title shot, at least for another 6, 7 months. I think the Darby Allin holding the title is the direct line into Team Taz coming after the title, whether that's Brian Cage or Ricky Starks. One of those two is going to come after Darby and try to take that title off of him so that they're holding two pieces of gold in that stable instead of just the FTW championship. My guess would be Ricky Starks just because you don't want your monster to lose clean or even dirty to Darby Allin and then ruin that credibility. But continuing on, we had Shida defending her AEW Women's Championship against Nyla Rose. This is like the third time this year these two have faced off on pay-per-view. This is the only time in recent weeks that Nyla's even been seen on AEW. It was explained away on commentary that Nyla feels that she is so talented she shouldn't have to wrestle unless it's for a title shot. So that is kind of how they explained that she hasn't been seen on TV in weeks and yet showed up at the pay-per-view and had a title shot and no one seemed to have an issue with it. I think it's just they're not telling interesting stories with their women's division and ran out of time to build a feud. Shida wins the match. After the match, Vicky Guerrero climbs into the ring and slaps Nyla across the face before leaving the ring and like storming back up the ramp. So we might be getting a little bit of story between those two. Vicky obviously is Nyla's manager right now, and Nyla brought Vicky in when she felt that she wasn't getting enough opportunities as a singles wrestler and was seeing that everyone that had a manager was getting title opportunity after title opportunity, and that's why Vicky was brought in. So it's interesting to me to see that Vicky is the one that kind of snapped on Nyla and not the other way around. Hopefully we get a little bit of story with that and it's not just kind of done and then forgotten about.
Yeah, hopefully, because I feel like I don't know if it could mean that them just going their separate ways or just more like power struggle or like tension between the two. But I could also read into it as just Nyla Rose just being going to like a babyface role, just because like when you look at her in interviews and you see her Twitter presence, she's got a lot of charm to her and she's got charm to her as a heel, but I think she has a lot of charm to her that works on like a babyface level. So if they wanted to go in that direction, this could be a good window. And it makes me curious that if they are splitting, then who could Vicky Guerrero realistically pick up as like her new managerial client?
Exactly. It's definitely one of those things where if you're going to turn her and not Vicky as well, you've got to have something for Vicky to do unless you're just going to take her off TV completely, which after the WWE has blackballed her for appearing on AEW television, I don't think AEW is going to do, simply out of reverence and respect for the Guerrero name. So we'll see who they go with. It would be interesting to me, I think, if she's able to worm her way in with Shida and kind of represent her because Shida isn't very strong on the mic with English being her second language, and having that mouthpiece might be a way to actually build some story with that women's title.
See, I don't know, because I feel like whoever Vicky works with, that character is automatically gonna be a heel because
Hmm.
that's just how good of a heel Vicky Guerrero is. I don't know if you want to turn Hikaru Shida as a face, and that's also keeping in mind that she's had the belt since maybe I feel like January, February, whenever Revolution was, if I'm not mistaken. And if Shida has ran out of babyface challengers, I mean heel challengers, then sure you can turn her, but I feel like she's so over, or at least last time I saw her, she was super over as a babyface in a way that turn her heel would be kind of a mistake. And it's hard for me to even imagine her in a heel character. It'll be different, I guess, but I don't know if that's the right trajectory.
No, and that's definitely fair. Unfortunately, only time will tell on this one. So continuing on with the show, we had FTR and the Young Bucks facing off for the first time ever. This match is being widely considered a love letter to tag team wrestling. They're pulling out moves from like influential tag teams all over the place. At one point, the FTR does like the Steiner Brothers finisher. The Young Bucks are doing the double D from the Dudley Brothers. They pull out a Swanton Bomb and like snap suplex combination, a la like uh, the Hardy Brothers. There's some Edge and Christian nods all the way through. Uh, FTR are very like clearly the heels and like playing with the Young Bucks all the way through. At one point, Tully Blanchard is like screaming at them from ringside to take this seriously and like give them the respect they're due and like take them seriously as competitors. They don't, and it ends with the Young Bucks becoming the AEW World Tag Team Champions. So the Young Bucks are the best in the world and won that match. It was a good match. I would have rathered the Young Bucks not win it if it meant it was for the titles, or this match not have been for the titles, but I get why it was. I don't care to see the Young Bucks at the top of their own company. This is an issue that I had with AEW at the start that I'm starting to see realized, where what's the point of doing something different and running a new company and your own company and bringing in young people if all you're going to use the young people for, or the people that haven't gotten their fair shake for, is to make yourselves look even bigger and even better. You had Cody holding the TNT championship against people like Warhorse. You had uh, Kenny Omega and Hangman Page holding the tag team titles for almost a year. You had SCU holding the tag team titles before them, who are very close to the Young Bucks. And now you've got the Young Bucks holding the tag team titles. It's one of those things where you kind of wish there was someone in the back who had experience as a booker who just kind of looked at these guys and said, "Give me the book and go sit in your locker room and I will tell you what we're doing when I figure it out." That has a little bit of narrative experience, because right now it feels like they're just putting the belt on the people that they like the best, and the other people they brought in to make them look good are kind of used as an afterthought. I mean, we haven't seen Private Party on TV in weeks. We haven't seen Will Hobbs actually compete in a match in weeks. All these names that they brought in to elevate themselves, now that they've done their job and taken their lumps, are kind of fading into the background. And it's really starting to feel like the Cody and Friends show, which makes me nervous.
I agree with you to an extent, just because like on one hand with the Bucks winning, it is like a little off. It does seem like these wrestlers kind of made a company just to put themselves over, but with the Young Bucks being considered quote unquote the greatest tag team ever, it was kind of they were kind of destined to win the belts at some point. And while I do definitely see your point as far as like you don't want this to become BTE the show or BTE the company extravaganza or anything like that.
Yeah, I just don't
But
want it to
it's
be BTE on TNT, basically, of like, here's all our buddies. We're maybe wrestling sometimes. Ha, we're so funny and cool. Just if that's what you're into, go watch it on YouTube. I want to see wrestling on my wrestling show, and I don't want to see the same three guys winning consistently.
exactly. But I also like what I'm getting at is that I think if they play their cards right, this could work in that like you've got, because like the luxury of these wrestlers owning their own company is the fact that before they founded it, they were at least super over wherever they were. The Bucks were over in a lot of people's eyes as the greatest tag team ever. So if they use these tag team titles and even perhaps even lean into the fact that, hey, we own the company and we own this division as like a kind of like smirky, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, heel type of thing, people could get annoyed with it and want to see them lose the belts, and whoever beats them are going to get really over. Like I kind of see in the same vein as sort of like Dusty Rhodes, like he would book himself as the NWA champion, but for one, unless I'm mistaken, Dusty never really booked himself in like super long reigns. He only ever had the belt for like a month, 2 months at that. And two, Dusty was really good. So people, heels who beat Dusty, they became super over as heels. And I feel like if, say, a private party beat Young Bucks for the tag team titles, that immediately is gonna skyrocket them. And like I remember when Private Party beat Young Bucks in that tournament, it was a big deal in the moment, but it was kind of like a one and done thing. They never really pushed Private Party afterwards. But if they play their cards right and have a young team like Private Party who aren't necessarily in the mix, but could easily elevate by a win over the Bucks, then that's a benefit I think that can happen from the Bucks being champions.
Definitely agree. It's just I don't know that I have the faith in the Bucks and Cody to make that booking decision and allow themselves to, you know, make that storyline. Like it definitely seems like the members of the elite that are turning heel are starting to align together. So you've got the Young Bucks who were super kicking everybody, and you've got Kenny Omega who is moving back to the cleaner persona, kind of reforming the original elite. And then it seems like the outsiders, Cody Rhodes and Hangman Page might be starting to like circle in on each other and like reform there as like we were never as in with the group as those three guys were in with the group, and maybe we just need to leave them behind and look out for ourselves in kind of a way. It's just a matter of trusting them to put the product above themselves, which I don't know that I necessarily do at this time. So continuing on, we've got two more matches to go over. MJF defeats Chris Jericho for the right to join the Inner Circle. This was every other Chris Jericho match of the last year. It was slow and clunky and awkward at points, but it was serviceable. I mean, Chris Jericho is a legend and is still decent in the ring. Like he's nowhere near what he was 10 or even 15 years ago, but he does okay. This was an okay match. It was definitely the weakest match on the card for me all night. Uh, I mean, do you have any thoughts about MJF joining the Inner Circle?
Well, for one, I didn't know that match was happening. That's really interesting. MJF in the Inner Circle. I'm not sure if he's just imagining who else is in the Inner Circle. Okay, now the group just sounds really blurred on paper, but the inclusion of MJF, I can't really see going anywhere besides like the Inner Circle just kind of blowing up on itself, like MJF and Chris Jericho maybe even having a power struggle, people either split off or just leave the group entirely. If they want to write off the Inner Circle, then this is a perfect way to do it, I suppose. But if they really want this to like say cable MJF into the main event scene by putting him with all of these guys, I don't think that's going to work.
No, I definitely agree. It's one where depending on what you're trying to do with it, it could be interesting, but if you try to do too much with it and make it too much wrestling and not enough like gimmicky like just skits, these guys are gonna outstay their welcome really really fast. But getting into the main event of the night, we had Moxley winning over Eddie Kingston, forcing him to say I quit after an insane match. So this was no holds barred, anything goes. So Moxley comes down to the ring with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire and is beating the hell out of him for a while about it. At one point Eddie Kingston like rips some barbed wire off of the bat, wraps it around his taped fist, and is punching Moxley full in the face with a fist full of barbed wire. And then he pulls him into like a bulldog choke with the barbed wire like wrapped around like his upper and lower lip. Uh, during this match, Renee Paquette, formerly of the WWE, who is currently married to Jon Moxley, just tweeted out, "God damn it, not again," because it seems like every time Moxley's in a main event on an AEW program, there's barbed wire involved, and I'm sure she's tired of it at this point. But Moxley ends up forcing Eddie Kingston to say "I quit" after wrapping that same bit of barbed wire around his face and pulling him into a submission and just holding him there, watching the ref try to wave him off and just holding him there until he's forced to say "I quit." This was a hell of a way to end the show, and is easily one of my favorite matches of the year. It was so brutal and so intense and really showed just how far TNT, and well, I guess not really TNT because this was a pay-per-view, but just how far AEW is willing to go to differentiate itself from WWE and kind of harken back to those like late 80s, early 90s, like, we know why you like Cactus Jack. We're going to put Cactus Jack into positions where he looks like he might die, but he's fine. You know he's fine. You're just going to enjoy the blood and the violence. And death matches, for better or for worse, is where Eddie Kingston and Jon Moxley made their names and got their notice and became household names. So why not, if you're going to put them both in a main event, let them do a death match?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I like that they're willing to just lean into that super violent style that's kind of considered taboo in like mainstream circles. There's a reason WWE doesn't do like matches like that or the lights out match Moxley was in last year. So it's cool that they're willing to do stuff like that. As far as like the result, I'm kind of disappointed that Kingston didn't win it, but like you said last week, this Kingston's so good that this probably isn't the last time we see him in a title match, and hopefully it's eventually one day going to lead to him winning the title. But like you were also saying last week, it makes sense because there's they clearly have bigger plans for Moxley and the challengers around him. And if the challenger next is going to be Kenny Omega, which actually now thinking about harkens back to that lights out match from last year and revisiting that feud, that's I think that's going to be big whenever that happens.
So jumping over to Raw and SmackDown, there were just 3 matches over 5.5 hours of wrestling we want to talk about this week. So I'm just going to go through all 3 matches and their results, and then we'll get your thoughts at the end if you're cool with that.
Works for me.
Okay, so over on SmackDown, we had Baron Corbin defeating Rey Mysterio to earn a place on the Survivor Series team after a distraction from Seth Rollins. We then, later in the night, had Seth Rollins defeating Otis to earn a place on the Survivor Series team after a distraction from Murphy. And then on Raw, the only match worth talking about was Riddle defeating Jeff Hardy and Elias to earn the final spot on Raw's Survivor Series team. So there's one spot remaining for SmackDown. Raw's men's team is set, and both women's teams are set. Any thoughts on a slew of Survivor Series qualifying matches?
Who's all on the Team Raw and Team SmackDown teams?
The men's team for uh, Raw on some Survivor Series is Keith Lee, AJ Styles, Sheamus, Braun Strowman, and Riddle. The men's SmackDown team is Kevin Owens, Jey Uso, King Corbin, Seth Rollins, and then one to be determined next week. So tonight that you're watching this episode.
Okay, that very much sounds like it could be a fun match. My only problem with Survivor Series matches like this has just been that these matches have always been kind of like low stakes to me. Like the only thing online is brand supremacy. Who's the best brand? And most fans, I feel like, or at least me, like don't really care about brands. They kind of care about the wrestlers. And if the wrestlers themselves don't get anything post pay-per-view out of this story-wise, then it's just kind of I don't know. It's just nothing to me. So is at least coming across good on TV the way they're setting this up?
I mean, it's interesting. Most of the matches are okay, but a lot of the matches are like pretty clear immediately who's gonna win, and it's just a match to kill 15, 20 minutes. The teams seem to be very like, we all don't like each other, but we're representing Raw and we're representing SmackDown, which I've never really understood why, you would set aside your personal issues to represent a brand if you're not getting anything out of it. Kind of the same way I had an issue with the Survivor Series last year where, Women's War Games was the Saturday before Survivor Series on Sunday, and like of the 8 participants in the Women's War Games match, 5 of them were in Survivor Series and came out at Survivor Series all arm in arm, and they were all on different teams, and they were all happy to be there representing NXT. Like, that animosity doesn't just go away overnight. So that's where I have the issue, is if you kept the storyline and maybe had like people drop off the apron because they don't like a wrestler, that's one thing. But just being like, oh no, it's personal issues don't matter. Survivor Series, let's go. I don't care. It's never really done it for me. Survivor Series is probably like my least favorite pay-per-view of the year.
Same here, and I think that's another reason why I don't really like the concept of the Raw versus SmackDown thing. Again, it's low stakes stuff, but like for the sake of the brand, these wrestlers who hate each other agree to team up to show that their brand is the best. But it's again like it's low stakes stuff. If you're not getting anything out of it, first off, why should I care and why should you care that much? It just never made sense to me. The last time I feel like a Survivor Series match made sense was when they did the Alliance WCW ECW versus WWE, because the stakes were actually high there. The losing team, your company is over, your company ends, so it made sense when they did that in '01. Everything after that just kind of doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you kind of wish that WWE took a hint from AEW, and instead of doing gimmick pay-per-views, just did like recurring names, and then whatever match applied to that pay-per-view just like fell in on that show. So like you have your all out, your full gear, those kinds of shows every year, no matter what, but the match types are going to be different. But when you like set yourself up to be like, this is Survivor Series every year, this is Hell in a Cell every year, like you're gonna run into these issues of like, well, we didn't book something that needs a Survivor Series, or we didn't book something that needs a Hell in a Cell, and you're gonna keep going back to that well until people just stop tuning in.
Right. Or at the very least, just like add like something with long-term stakes to it. Like you could do something as small as just like whoever's survives on the team, if you're like the last 2 people not eliminated, you both get a title shot at future pay-per-view. That's gonna make people care to see is like, oh, who's gonna survive the match and get their own number one contenders match or whatever. Or something like surviving team gets the last 5 picks in the Royal Rumble match or something like that. Something small like that can go a long way in making people care, I think. But they never done it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely one where you have to play with the stipulation and not be afraid to like change things up that are kind of considered gospel at this point in order to keep it interesting. But jumping over to NXT, we had an actually really interesting night of NXT that kind of colors who I think is going to end up showing up on SmackDown to be that final member of the Survivor Series team. And that is because in the opening match, we had Leon Ruff facing off against Johnny Gargano. So Ruff is very much like early Gargano right now. He's been used as enhancement talent. He's been featured quite a bit in the last like month or two, but he hasn't really pulled out a victory or anything like that. Gargano is the North American champion right now and was able to kind of call his own shot for who he wanted to face for the title. He called out Leon Ruff. Ruff comes to the ring and Gargano is like playing with him, very similar to the match we talked about on Full Gear, where he's not taking it seriously. He just isn't that interested in like viewing Ruff as a equal competitor, and Ruff ends up winning and getting his first confirmed pinfall victory on NXT TV and taking the North American Championship for himself. So the fact that Gargano went out on his back and looked as ridiculous as he did, that seems like a lot of character work you're going to have to make up on NXT. I think he's going to show up on SmackDown tomorrow.
It's possible. So, like, was that a title match or?
Yeah, so Leon Ruff is your new North American champion.
That is so dope. Like Leon Ruff was kind of like the unsung hero of like when the quote unquote pandemic era first started. Like he was coming on NXT like every week, just getting ragdolled in these enhancement matches, and I'm glad he got a contract out of it, and I'm even more glad that he got a championship out of it. Like for one thing, that's very good for him. Two, I think it puts Gargano on an interesting road because there's two things you can do here. Like you said, one, he just moves brands. It's about time he moves brands. So hopefully you're right, and it means that he is going to SmackDown tomorrow or even going to Raw next week. Two, it could just you give like a story opportunity as far as like Gargano, this frustrated heel, not taking this quote unquote jobber seriously, and he gets flattened. So like he's either got look for revenge to get his tower back, or he has to look within himself, find some character development, and think, what am I doing wrong? Am I wrong going about this whole heel thing? Can I do something different? Do I need to go back to the old Gargano? Something like that. I think there's character development there coming.
Yeah, I mean there is, but my only issue with that being the angle that they would choose to go on NXT is if you've been watching NXT for any amount of time, you've seen Gargano do that. Like he flip-flops like crazy. Like he was a face when the pandemic started. Now he's the biggest heel on the brand. He'll be a face again. It's just I think you've gotten to a point now where similar to Ciampa, who admittedly has a little bit more time with the brand just because of his injuries and how restricted his ability to work was. Gargano's faced everybody that's interesting. There's no more intriguing matchups for Gargano, at least right now in NXT. And with Gargano's whole thing being like, I don't want to leave NXT, I don't want to travel. Like I spent most of my adult life traveling away from my family. I want to stay here. And us being in a pandemic, at least for the foreseeable future, I think this is the perfect time to move him up, even if it is only for 6 months or a year, because he's not having to travel. He's not having to leave Candace behind in Florida, and he's able to face new and exciting people. I want to see Gargano show up on SmackDown and face off against Daniel Bryan. I want to see him take on Cesaro. I want to see him take on Shinsuke. Like I want to see him face off against the Street Profits in one-on-one competition. Like there are so many interesting matchups that can happen in SmackDown or Raw that just can't happen right now on NXT, partially because he's been there for so long and partially because where he's at on the card, he's not really allowed to go down too far on the card and have these interesting matchups anymore.
I think that's fair. And like the more I think about it, like the only payoff you get from Gargano going down that character development is either him turning face or just prolonging the feud with Leon Ruff. And I don't think either is really an interesting prospect enough to really keep him in NXT. I do think him moving to Raw or SmackDown, especially with the pandemic keeping all the brands in Florida for the time being, having to move to those brands to have fresh matches, and who knows how long this pandemic is going to last. Like now is the time to move him to another brand so he can have fresh matchups. Like we were saying with Ciampa last week.
Absolutely. It's definitely one of those things where like you could keep him on NXT, you could run back the match with Ruff, but like if he wins, Ruff's buried and is never really gonna make that back. And if he loses, there no amount of changing him to different brands is going to erase the fact that a guy who for all intents and purposes was a jobber not only beat him but then defended the title he took off of him successfully. Like there's only so many times you can have these two guys like run it back against one another before one of them comes off looking like a dork and just loses all credibility within the company.
True. And now that you talk about credibility, I'm curious, like, do you think this loss diminishes his credibility enough where even going to another brand kind of doesn't really redeem him? Because, like, let's keep in mind, he just won that belt. I feel like you were just telling me last week he won it.
Yeah, so he won it at Halloween Havoc. He took it off Damian Priest. So it's been about 2 weeks now. Uh, as for losing the belt in the way he did, no, I don't think it loses him credibility because he didn't lose it clean. Like he lost it because he wasn't taking Leon Ruff seriously, and Leon Ruff took that opportunity to be like, no, I am a professional wrestler. Like I will fuck you up and you will respect me, and he capitalized on it, which was a big babyface moment for like all of NXT. So I don't think he loses credibility by losing it. I do think he loses credibility by going after it and losing it again. So if he comes after Leon and even when taking him seriously loses and then goes off to a different brand with his tail between his legs, he's gonna lose some of that like holy crap, you're Johnny Wrestling. Like that's crazy. Like Johnny Wrestling is on like Monday Night Raw facing off against AJ Styles, but didn't Johnny Wrestling lose like a couple of times to like a jobber a couple weeks ago on that other show that they tell us to care about, but now they're not talking about? Weird. That's strange. Like, I think you lose the ability to have these like huge marquee, like this guy was a Dragon Gate USA guy while this guy was a New Japan guy, matchups that you could have with like Shinsuke and AJ Styles and Cesaro and guys like that. You lose that by having him lose too many times in NXT without making that change. So we also had a Toni Storm and Candice LeRae match. It was really, really good. Candice ends up squeaking out the victory by using the ropes for leverage. Toni really didn't like lose any like baby face like benefit or like take any heat for this loss. Like Candice just kind of showed up and decided she was ready to go and wasn't really looking to play. It's revealed at the end of the match that the hooded figure that's been kind of acting as Candice's protector for several weeks is a returning Indy Hartwell who hasn't been seen in a couple of months due to an injury. So she's back, she's unmasked, and she's aligned herself with Candice LeRae. So we'll see how long that lasts. I'm just glad we don't have the Scream mask running around backstage anymore. It was cute during Halloween Havoc, but you know, we're 2-3 weeks removed and we still had that Scream mask showing up on our TV screens. It just didn't make sense. I think now is the right time to have Indy go ahead and unmask.
Has the hooded figure thing been going on since Halloween Havoc? This is the first time I'm hearing about it.
Yeah, so that's my fault. The hooded figure, Indy Hartwell, showed up to help Candice win that ladder match during Halloween Havoc. The tables, ladders, and stairs match. She kind of showed up and just like she didn't like manipulate the body or anything like that. She just kept her in the ring and kept her safe and kept her active. And then has just kind of been popping up in the background of like, you know, you see Candice backstage and there's the mask and then it's gone. And, you know, you have a match between Candice and say Shotzi and, you know, Candice is down and like kind of struggling to get back up and Shotzi's like looking out the ropes and then the Scream mask pops up and gets her across the face and then Shotzi's down and Candice is able to capitalize. So it's never been directly addressed that like Candice even knows that there's someone like out there looking out for her, but it has been pretty heavy-handedly implied that this is someone that like is looking out exclusively for Candice right now. So not Johnny, just Candice.
Okay, and hearing that, like, I feel like pairing Candice LeRae with Indy Hartwell, I think that's a good decision. Like, I feel like in regards to in-ring success, at least, like something just hasn't really been clicking with Candice LeRae. Maybe it's just the lack of in-ring success, so like that's kind of hurting her credibility. But I feel like putting her in a duo of sorts could help like add something to her that's she hasn't really had for the last few years. Like it reminds me of when Emma was down in NXT and nothing was really clicking for her, so she turned heel and paired with a rookie Danny Brooke, and that pairing was really great, and it's why they got called up to the main roster together. Emma got injured like a week or two later, but the pairing was good enough that they got called up, and I feel like if Indy Hartwell is able to work off of Candice LeRae and vice versa, and some great things come about, I think Candice LeRae gets herself finally called up herself, and they might turn out to be a really entertaining duo.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that's where we're headed, where, you know, Candice is going to be one of those people that works NXT and never really holds an NXT title, but then goes on to work Raw or SmackDown in the same kind of vein as a Dana Brooke, who came down to NXT when that was like started as an official brand for a while, and then also Sassy Southern Belle, what is her name?
Lacey Evans?
Lacey
Yeah.
Evans, yes, who showed up on NXT for like 2 weeks before popping up on Raw or SmackDown because her look was just so unique. It definitely seems like that's kind of where they're going with Candice, and maybe setting up Candice and Indy to be like this dominant women's tag team that'll show up on Raw and like finally give the current holders of the women's tag team belts, Shayna and Nia, a run for their money.
Plus, I think Indy Hartwell could like learn a thing or two. Like not just because Candice LeRae is a variant of the sport, she's gonna learn some things from her. But I suppose you could say this kind of like Indy Hartwell's repackaging of sorts. Like before she got injured, she was kind of just a jobber, enhancement talent, and
Hmm.
now she's finally springboarded into like an actual storyline. So it's it, it seems like what's the phrase? Everybody gets something out of it, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that does it for NXT. So we're going to jump over to AEW. There's only three things that I wanted to talk about with AEW. One of them is going to take a while to talk about because I can just imagine you kind of going crazy. And it's this. Cody Rhodes versus Shaq is being teased currently by AEW television.
Excuse me? Wait.
Yeah, Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball player, Hall of Famer. Yes, he is being teased as wanting to be in a match with Cody Rhodes. So there is a moment where during AEW television in the opening, Cody is in the ring and he's giving a promo about how talented Darby Allin is and how losing to Darby Allin is going to make him come back stronger and faster and be a wrestler deserving of the TNT title, thinking that he's gonna like go more babyface with this no title run, kind of aligning with Hangman Page in the same kind of Civil War split that we were talking about during the pay-per-view. And then a young woman who we haven't seen on Dark or AEW comes down in like full wrestler garb. She takes the mic away and she delivers a promo that basically boils down to, you say you're the slayer of giants. You say you're the best. You've never fought a giant, not a real giant. I know a giant who wants to fight you, and his name is Shaquille O'Neal. And that's the entire promo. It didn't make a ton of sense. It was real weird and out of left field. This was a really weird episode of AEW, but I'm kind of excited for this match. Weirdly enough, like this could either be the greatest and most bizarre match of our lives, or so bad that we're gonna watch it every year for the next 20 years.
I think I'm in too much of awe to really like form a cohesive thought. Like this, I'm, I'm also trying to wrap my head around like why, and I guess they haven't explained it. So
No, they haven't. It was just that promo where she goes, I know a real giant, Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq does not appear on the screen. Shaq doesn't appear in the tunnel. Like, Shaq is nowhere on this program. It's just them name dropping Shaq. And then, like, her and Brandy Rhodes get into, like, a bit of a bitch fight for a minute. And then it kind of just dissipates and they go on with the next spot. It was really odd, but I'm really, really excited.
it, that's so weird. But I guess like it could work on level of like you said, this guy to be the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever, and I'm very curious to see where it goes. And for some reason, like I'm starting to realize that Cody Rhodes has a knack for getting new storylines by doing something completely random. Like I keep thinking about the Jake Roberts promo he had. I forget what storyline he was coming out of, but that was another situation where he was addressing some wrestler that he lost to, and he was talking about he was going to bounce back bigger than ever. And then out of nowhere, Jake the Snake Roberts, who I don't even think at that point had been in wrestling for like 5 or 6 years, comes out, gives a cryptic promo, and then a week or two later, he six Lance Archer on him. So like, if that storyline paid off in its weird randomness, I hope Cody versus Shaq is able to pay off in the same way. That's such a weird sense. Why am I saying Cody versus Shaq? Oh my God.
You know
It's
what? Why not, man? Why not?
why
Yeah, no,
not?
it's definitely going to be super weird, and part of me kind of hopes that Shaq like goes through the whole like he gets the tweet of Shaq is all elite and he just shows up for like a month or two because he's just bored because there's no NBA on, and this is just a way to kill time until the NBA season starts back up and he's needed back on TNT. But then again, he also hosts that NBA show on TNT, so he could just become a professional wrestler in AEW for a while, which I think would be hilarious.
He could, and they've even had like they've referenced AEW on Inside the NBA. There was an episode where Chris Jericho popped up on Inside the NBA with Shaq, so there was a connection there, I guess. I don't know how Cody specifically fits into that connection, but it makes me really excited to see where this could go for perhaps all the right and the wrong reasons, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But speaking of interesting matches, it was then announced in a video segment that Kenny Omega versus John Moxley for the AEW World Heavyweight Championship is being set for the December 11th episode of AEW Dynamite, which I believe is the first time the World Championship has been defended actually on AEW on TNT. Like, we've had the world champion on TNT, but I don't know that they've ever defended their belt, because I know Jericho never did, and I don't think Moxley's ever defended his belt actually on TNT either.
I think Jericho did once in like the second or third week of Dynamite. It was him versus Darby Allin in the street fight, which I think was a title match.
Was that for that title, or was that just because they didn't like each other?
You know, it was a title match because I remember like the first or second
Okay.
week of Dynamite, Darby beat I think Jimmy Havoc in a random number one contenders match, and then they had the
Jimmy
street
Havoc
fight.
used to be on AEW. I forgot all about that guy.
Same here until I
Jeez.
just randomly flash back right now.
Okay, well then, I was wrong. But Kenny Omega versus John Moxley set for the December 11th episode of AEW Dynamite. That should be a hell of a match. It's been announced also that it's just a straight up wrestling match, no death match crap. So we're not going to have, Kenny Omega getting power bombed through a glass table or anything like that this time. Kenny Omega did a really, really compelling promo that basically said, in legitimate wrestling matches, we're 0-0 against each other. He's never beat me one-on-one in a wrestling ring. He beat me outside of a wrestling ring, but that doesn't matter to me. So this will be really, really good. I'm guessing this will be another one of my favorite matches of the year on one of the last AEWs of the year.
See, that's weird logic to me. Like, I get the match they had last year was like an unsanctioned match, so technically it's not on the books, and they said it doesn't count towards the AEW rankings thing, but it's still a match that I saw, so I feel like it should count. Like we should be
Well, I don't
saying,
even think it's necessarily that he's saying it was unsanctioned, so it doesn't count. I think he was just saying it was falls count anywhere, so it doesn't count. Because inside the squared circle, I'm infinitely better than him. When you allow him to use weapons and go outside and like use my environment against me, sure, he could probably beat me. But inside that squared circle, I'm the best there is, best there was, and best there ever will be, and I'm gonna beat him.
okay, looking at that logic, that makes much more sense. Like it's very much a logic of you can beat me in a fight with weapons, but when it's just straight up grappling, wrestling, I'm the king of this, so
Hmm.
it makes sense. Makes sense.
And it lends credence to his kind of character shift of going back to that cleaner persona of being like, I'm going back to who I was when I was considered the greatest in the world at what we do, and kind of having that character shift. That to me makes a lot of sense logistically, that's how that's going to go. But the last match we want to talk about is actually the main event of the night, where
Actually,
Penta.
I still got a couple more thoughts on that.
Go right ahead, my bad.
As far as like the title match happening on the 11th, I'm very surprised they're doing this so fast. Though, like maybe it's because the next pay per view maybe isn't until say January or February, so they gotta get out quicker rather than just drag it out later. I feel like there's enough intake story wise to drag this out, but if you're not having a pay per view for the next 2 3 months, might as well get out of the way now. It does make me really question like, are they going to have the title change hands now so soon on the 11th, or are they going to have Moxley win and then maybe stretch out that feud a little more, or just have him toss Omega aside and then just move on to something bigger?
Well, Moxley around December 11th will be coming up on just over a year of holding that title. So I think unless you're gonna have him drop it at Revolution, which is in February of next year, it is the next pay-per-view on the docket. I think having him drop it on during this match and having, uh, you know, Omega kind of carry it through into 2021 is the thing that you're gonna want to do.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing to go, especially if you don't want this this championship reign to get too stale. 'Cause like you said, we're approaching a year or just over a year of the reign.
Hmm.
Ending it now at least freshens Moxley up to coming off the heels of being Wrestler of the Year to move on to something else that freshen up his character a little bit without having the towel around his waist.
Yeah, and to go a little kayfabe with it, it also allows him to travel to Japan to do Wrestle Kingdom, the in the end of December, beginning of January, and defend his U.S. title, which he is still the title holder for New Japan Pro Wrestling of their United States title. So that allows him to kind of drop that title and then disappear due to injury from AEW television for a while, show up in New Japan, defend his title, fulfill his requirements there, quarantine there, quarantine back, and then be able to come back ready to go and without any issues.
I completely forgot he was the U.S. champion.
Yeah, a lot of people did. It'll have been almost an entire year since he won the U.S. title because he won it in that Texas Death Match at Wrestle Kingdom last year against Lance Archer, and then never was able to go back and defend it because he was meant to defend it in March, but then obviously the pandemic, and now here we are 8 months later.
But now it makes even more sense for him to lose it.
Exactly. And I hate bringing like outside promotions and other promotions like booking decisions into it to figure out what's going to happen. But unfortunately, that's just kind of what you have to do when it comes to Moxley because he is so important to so many different promotions. You have to take his full schedule into account. All right. And that brings us to the main event of the night where Pentagon and Phoenix are having a rematch of the AEW number one contender tournament. These guys have been kind of getting at each other's throats for the last couple of weeks, and it's pretty intense from the get. Like they're both just ripping at each other's masks. Penta's mask is like hanging off his face at one point, like half of his entire face is exposed and just out there. So we know what Penta looks like from the profile now. Phoenix's mask is like torn up. They're both bloody. Penta ends up securing the win and is like in the ring when Eddie comes down, and like Eddie does this really great like subtle storytelling where as like Phoenix is just like laid out in the middle of the ring just like dead to the world, he like is about to step over his hands but then decides to kick his hands and like kick his arms to get him out of his own way so that he doesn't have to step over him, just kind of like, oh, get the trash out of my way, and is like complimenting Pentagon and telling him that like Phoenix is dead weight. If he sticks with him, he'll be a world champion soon, and just kind of hyping him up and talking all big. And then Pac's music hits. Pac is back in AEW. Pac is back in the United States, and Pac, in his good old Geordie accent, says some stuff that I didn't understand on TV, but thanks to the Cultaholic boys, I found out to say, "You've been mean to my mates recently, have you?" So it looks like right now we're setting up for Phoenix to align with Pac, Penta to align with Eddie, and for that kind of war to get started, hopefully eventually bringing Penta back into the fold, reestablishing the murder triangle, and getting them back on the road that they were headed down.
Okay, looking at the match itself between Phoenix and Pentagon, it very much sounds like the match they had in Lucha Underground. It was
Mm-hmm.
very bloody, mask torn apart, and that was a very good match. And if their match was as good as that, I bet their match in AEW was really great. And I'm kind of glad they're feuding because I always felt like because their styles are so different, they're more interesting when they're facing off against each other rather than with each other in a tag team. So hopefully this opens the door for more matches between them one on one and more like an actual feud between them rather than the tag team stuff. And with Neville back, I'm sorry, Pac back, it's I'm very interested to see where this power struggle goes. Like is he going to like try like see this out with re regrouping with Eddie Kingston, or are they going to like the four of them going to try things out for a little bit, or are they immediately going to split 2v2 Wolfpack versus Hollywood style type of deal, or just going to go their separate ways eventually? There's a lot of ways it can go, and I'm very curious to see where they go in the coming weeks.
Well, see, you've also got to remember that it's not just Phoenix and Penta that were aligned with Eddie Kingston. He's also got Butcher and Blade under his protection as well. So right now it's Penta, Butcher, Blade, and Eddie up against Phoenix and Pac. So unless Pac is bringing people over with him from the UK scene, which I think would be a really cool way to reintroduce some new blood into AEW, I think you're going to have kind of Pac and Phoenix going into like these tag team matches, and fighting from below and eventually bringing Penta back into the fold.
That makes me even more interested to see where it goes as far as like where do Butcher and Blade and I guess by proxy Alley, where do those three fit into this group going forward? So again, there's a lot of places this storyline could go, and I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Absolutely. And now that Allie seems to have kind of fallen in line with Eddie Kingston as well and is done with her story with the Natural Nightmares, you could even have like Pac bring over like a UK based like women's wrestler. Like this could be the way you reintroduce Bea Priestley now that travel seems to be opened back up, and bring her back into the fold and have them wrestle each other. Or if Bea Priestley's time in New Japan now and like has made her decide that that move is permanent, and she's gone over to New Japan full time with Will to do Stardom and New Japan dates, then you bring someone else from the UK indie scene and just allow them to kind of build up these two warring factions that are actually interesting. All right. And speaking of New Japan Pro Wrestling, they had their Power Struggle event on Saturday night. There are 4 matches we want to go over that have major implications for like the rest of the year in New Japan and even part of next year in New Japan. I can just go through all 4 results and then we can get your thoughts at the end, or we can go bit by bit, whichever you prefer.
We could stream down like the card, then just if something like pokes out at me, I can be like, wait, we gotta talk about that.
Okay, so it started off with Shingo Takagi defeating Minoru Suzuki to win the Never Openweight title. Suzuki defended it successfully once and dropped it to Takagi. Yeah, it was an okay match, nothing too crazy. You know, Suzuki and Takagi, when they get into the ring together, they're gonna be shoot fighting more often than not. So it was hard hitting and it was intense. It was good. We also had Toru Yano defeating Zack Sabre Jr. to remain the king of pro wrestling for 2020. 3 months ago, this would have made no sense, but Toru Yano put together a hell of a run in the G1 and was still doing his comedy stuff, but also seems to have gotten confidence within himself of being like, no, I'm actually a good professional wrestler. Like, being the king of pro wrestling wasn't a fluke. Getting 10 points in the G1 wasn't a fluke, and seems to be like shifting to taking himself more seriously as a competitor, which I like to see. We also had Jay White defeating Kota Ibushi and claiming his G1 Climax briefcase for himself. So now it'll be Jay White challenging the holder of the IWGP IC title and heavyweight title at Wrestle Kingdom. And speaking of those titles, we had Tatsuya Naito defeating Evil to retain his IWGP Intercontinental and heavyweight titles. So right now it looks like the main event of at least night 2 of Wrestle Kingdom is going to be Tatsuya Naito versus Jay White for either the IWGP Heavyweight or IC title. Or both. I don't really know how the briefcase is working with it being a double champion, because usually it's just for the heavyweight title that the briefcase can be turned in for. But I think maybe because it's a double champion, he can turn him in for both. But you would think he would want to have Naito in the main event on both nights, defending the IC and then defending the heavyweight. What I'm kind of hoping happens is that Naito faces Kota for the IC title on night 1, and then like faces White for the heavyweight title on night 2. Drops both belts, and then we kind of get Jay White and Kota Ibushi kind of like butting heads because, you know, Jay White wants to be double champion. Ibushi wants to get his first reign with the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, which he feels he deserves after winning the G1 Climax 2 years in a row and making the finals 3 years in a row.
That could be a good way to go about it. Like I was going to say, I'm disappointed to hear Kota Ibushi lost his briefcase because I was really looking forward to seeing him finally get that world belt. But it seems like that could still be a possibility. Like you said, Jay White could get shot one night, maybe even win it, and Kota Ibushi somehow gets a title shot for, say, night 2. And if he ends up being Jay White for the belt, or belts, I should say, that would be like a good, like, I guess, redemption story for him, especially since they had that whole spiel backstage with the whole champagne where they're like passive aggressively just staring down at each other, basically saying this isn't over. I want that briefcase, and they could pay that off for Kota Ibushi beating him in a rematch at Wrestle Kingdom and winning the belts. So it's a lot of like payoff ways to go about it. But as far as like the champions themselves, I'm very surprised that Naito got the belt back, especially so fast. I feel like he got it in sometime in the summer or something like that. But I'm kind of like,
Yeah,
I
he won
feel
it back from Evil at the Stadium Series back in
okay.
like June.
Yeah, I figured that was the case. But I feel like they should have just kind of stuck with Evil because, like, they did so much work to really put Evil over as not only the next big heel in New Japan, but as the leader of the Bullet Club. And for him to lose it this fast and this soon before the biggest pay-per-view of the year, I it makes you wonder if Evil was clicking with audiences as far as like did people buy him as a world champion? That's the only reason I could think they'd take the belt off him so soon. But if you're gonna lay the groundwork so hard and so thick to make him seem like a legitimate threat, I don't know if putting the belt back on Naito is the right call. How do you feel about it?
I mean, I like Naito with the belt. Evil just never really made a ton of sense to me with the belts. I liked that they gave them to him. I liked that they had like that 3-year storyline kind of ready-made and ready to go. I think Evil will end up getting the belts again. I don't think it'll happen until they split those belts up or end up like uh conjoining them. So I don't think we'll see Evil be another double champion. He'll either just be the heavyweight title holder, just be the IC title holder, or it'll come after a unification that he ends up holding the belt that remains.
I agree with you to an extent. Like I feel like Evil's championship run came very much out of left field because I remember seeing the reaction on Twitter, like when he first got the championship match, people just saw it as, oh, this guy's been in the company very long. This is gonna be a good match. He's due just a good championship pay-per-view main events, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Evil's heel now. Oh wait, Evil is in the Bullet Club now. He's leading the Bullet Club. He's a champion now. It was just a lot at once, and the last time I really seen it for some reason I'm getting flashbacks of like when JBL won the belt and when Jinder Mahal won the belt because it's very much while it's very different, it's very much a case of two guys who you would never imagine to win the world title end up just skyrocketing up the card within like a matter of days or a matter of weeks. JBL went from this beer guzzling mid card to one of the longest reigning WWE champions within the span of like 2, 3 weeks when you go back in time. Jinder Mahal went from a bona fide jobber to a WWE champion for about 9 or 10 months in the span of about a month's time. So Evil is similar in that regard, and I'll give WWE credit where credit's due with Jinder and JBO, regardless of how you may feel about their reigns. They knew what they wanted to do and they wanted to stick with it for as long as they could. They at least committed to a random, ridiculous idea, and I feel like New Japan should have stuck with that idea for as hard as they tried to push Evil in the same vein, I think. And I think him losing it so fast kind of hurts his credibility really fast.
Uh, the gender to Evil comparison just doesn't work because while Jinder was in the 3-man band who was losing in like pre-show matches to like little people and like things like that, Evil was a multi-time uh, uh, tag team champion in IWGP, IWGP tag team champion in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He won the World Tag League several times. Him and Sonata were like one of the most dominant tag teams in the recent era with the New Japan Pro Wrestling. So I see where you're coming from with that, but it's not the same where like he was already a bona fide champion. Like he held his own against the Gorillas of Destiny. He held his own and defeated the Young Bucks in their final match in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Like he is a big deal and he has been a big deal for a very long time. He just wasn't a single star big deal. So the single stuff comes out of nowhere, sure, but he's always been really, really good. I do want to make sure that's clear that like we understand that he's always been really, really talented.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. Like I wasn't trying to diminish what Evil was in the ring, and I think maybe the gender comparison is a bad comparison in retrospect when you look at genders work in the ring. The JBL comparison may be more apt because with JBL you got a guy who was a tag team wrestler for X amount of years, and he turns heel one night. He goes from being Bill Guzzling mid card, who's been a breaks up with Ron Simmons, and in the same night he's completely new character. Same night he gets that number one contenders match. I mean, a number one contender shot, and then 2 3 weeks later he wins the WWE Championship. So I think the comparison in that regard is more apt between him and Evil. The bigger difference is that WWE actually committed to making such a drastic change of the status quo, and New Japan, it seems like they didn't. Just 4 or 5 months after Evil won it.
That's fair. That I can cop to. It's just I just wanted to make sure like we weren't saying that Ginger and Evil were on the same playing field because they're not. But that'll bring us to the indie spotlight. Obviously, I watch a lot of wrestling. I watch a lot of indie wrestling as well. Every week, I bring you a different indie wrestling event that I think you should give your time, money, and attention to check out. This week, it's H2O Wrestling's The Last Extravaganza Part 1. This was on Independent Wrestling TV. This is a card of death matches. Matt Tremont, who is isn't even kind of, he is a legend in the deathmatch wrestling scene, ended his 10-year career this year on October 20th and had a final match at H2O Wrestling against Ricky Shane Page in a no ropes, barbed wire, and 220 light tube match. It's a mouthful. It was bloody and it was awesome. If you're into death matches, or if you even think you might be into death matches, you want to go seek out this card. It had some of the best up and comers in deathmatch wrestling, some of the biggest names currently active in deathmatch wrestling, and then obviously Matt Tremont, writing his swan song, riding off into the sunset, and finishing off a spectacular career.
Okay, that sounds good. It sounds wild, but it's Matt Tremont and his career there. That itself is super cool. So definitely throw y'all money at that. And this is time for my segment. Is now a good time to get back into wrestling if you haven't been watching? That's a mouthful right there. So my verdict, I guess, is that there's nothing too exciting this week that made me personally go, I want to get back into wrestling. And aside from maybe from the sounds of it, Eddie Kingston versus Moxley and the Penta Phoenix Pac stuff, there's not much I can really like recommend to people who are really trying to get back into wrestling. It seems like wrestling's doing a lot of weird stuff booking wise. Like you got the mass roster stuff for NXT, the Evil stuff, Evil losing the title so fast. So they're making a very oh yeah, and Shaq versus Cody. Almost forgot that was the thing. So
Yeah.
wrestling is doing some very different and weird things. Though if you like weird and most importantly different, this might be the time for you to jump in. But if not, you might want to wait until something more coherent and interesting happens.
Absolutely understand that. Thank you all so much for tuning in. You can follow me on Twitter at GladenCommaSam. That's GladenCommaSam, and read my coverage of all things pro wrestling at dailyddt.com and all things combat sports at fansided.com.
And if you like bad tweets, bad Instagrams, bad selfies, you can follow me at WhamMamsJam on Twitter and Instagram. You can look at my other podcast, Mental Health Check-In Podcast, which, like this podcast, available on all platforms. And if you're watching this on Friday when this drops, I just announced the debut of my digital media company, Uplift United, which consists of a podcast network, which includes this podcast and 3 other podcasts, and articles, which go on like a per submission basis. We can negotiate terms, but the flat rate is like $50. But again, we can negotiate if you want to drop an article pitch our way. But the website is officially launched, upliftunited.com. The social media handles Uplift United on Twitter and Instagram, and there's a Facebook page. if you just want to just see what we're doing, just visit the sites and just support all the cool people who are under the Uplift Unite umbrella, the podcasts, the writers. Yes, I wanted to really collect a bunch of cool people to do really cool things, and I wanted to provide a space where we all literally uplift each other's, and hopefully we do that, and you like what we're doing.
Absolutely. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, all the shows on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating and review. It really seriously helps us out. You can also follow the show itself on Twitter at lapsgraps. That's LAPSEDGRAPS. You can follow the network itself on Twitter at Uplift United. And until next time,
We out.
out.